Thank you, Madam Mayor. Folks, if it's okay with you, I'm not a podium kind of guy. I wander, I gesticulate, and the last thing you'd want is to have me hit Mayor Bates as I'm making some grand gesture over here, so that would be bad. So thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I am based in St. Petersburg, so I'm a Floridian as well. So what I'm going to talk about today, I think, impacts where I live. I want to see great things happen for our state and our communities. So sharing this, hopefully this knowledge, and maybe stir up some ideas for you guys to move forward. Maybe a different way of thinking about our cities, just a little bit. So I always ask the question out of the beginning. It says, do you love your city? And you say, yes. Of course. Now, you'd like to think that notion of loving your city is pretty common. Now, I suspect that in this audience, obviously that is true. But if we look broadly in our communities, sadly, that notion is not as popular or as common as we would like to think. In fact, the Gallup organization, in conjunction with the Knight Foundation, between 2008 and 2010, conducted what they called the Soul of the Community Survey, where they interviewed 40,000 people, 26 cities, and they're basically taking the temperature of our relationship with our places. And what they found was actually not very encouraging. 40% of people identified themselves as being unattached to their community, 36% are neutral, and 24%, less than 1/4 of us, are actually attached to our place. Now, attachment is not love. Attachment is maybe you voted, you're part of the community watch, and you volunteer once a year at the homeless shelter. Congratulations, you're attached, right? Doesn't feel very warm and fuzzy. Now, what was also kind of interesting was Gallup was correlating this with economic data at the same time. What they found was very interesting. The places that had the highest levels of emotional engagement, passion, and loyalty also had the correspondingly highest levels of local GDP and economic vitality. Interesting. Now, they were not going to go so far as to say these were causal, but clearly they were one of those interesting statistics that move together. And we all know we pay attention to those statistics that move together. We don't necessarily logically know why when it rains people do this, or when it's this time of year everyone buys this kind of thing, but we pay attention to that. And we should. And this notion of that love matters really shouldn't strike anybody as being sort of earth-shaking, because we all kind of get this. We know when children are loved, they thrive. And the same is true with pets, plants, and objects. And yeah, I do mean objects. I'm originally from Ohio. And come February in Ohio, most people's cars kind of look like this, right? Snow, covered in road salt, in dire need of a bath, probably needs some scheduled maintenance and whatnot, needing a little love, actually. But that sort of reflects the nature of the relationship that most of us have with our cars. I mean, let's face it, almost all of us have a relationship of some kind with an automobile, right? But it's a very functional relationship. It gets us from point A to point B, and it kind of is reflected in the way most of our cars probably look. But all of us know someone who loves cars, right? They're the ones who are out there on the weekends with a baby diaper as a chamois, waxing that car. They change the oil even if the car hasn't been driven an inch, because it's time to change the oil, right? We know those people. And that car looks and feels very different than the car the rest of us drive. Why? Well, because they've invested some of themselves, some of their identity, some of their love into that car, and it shows. Don't you think that if we invested more of ourselves, our identity, our emotional content, our love into our places, that our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities would shine a bit more like this car? I absolutely believe that. Now, I've been asking the question, what do people love and what do people hate about their cities, kind of all over the world for the last 8-9 years. And it's been very interesting to hear the responses that I've gotten, both the things that are very similar and the things that are, of course, wildly different. And what's interesting is that the things that are similar, people are really consistent across the board on the things they hate about their communities. Very consistent about the things they hate. And they tend to be big things, big intractable problems like transportation, like parking, like a bad education system, bad planning. Big intractable problems that you could spend tons and tons of money trying to solve, and I'm not sure you ever truly solve them. And I think nothing represents this more, and I think as the leaders of cities, you know this, you hear it, the pothole, right? The pothole. Citizens complain about potholes, you in turn fix the potholes, and you do this dance of chasing potholes and fixing potholes, right? I can tell you this, you could fix every pothole in your city and the citizens would say, thanks, the streets don't suck quite so bad. You get no love for filling potholes. There is no emotional return on investment for filling the potholes. Now, I'm not suggesting that we stop filling the potholes, but I am suggesting that we start thinking beyond filling the potholes. Because if we maybe if we found filled a few less potholes, we might find some interesting things to do with those resources. Because cities have to be, at the very least, they have to be functional and safe. Of course, that's the bare threshold, okay? And occasionally, sometimes some things happen and we kind of miss the mark and we have to go back and go to the very basics of functional and safe. But in tough economic times, it's really kind of easy to turtle back in on that conversation, that economic rationalism that says, okay, it's functional, it's safe, let's paint it battleship gray, kick it out the door, it's good enough, right? I don't think it's good enough, because the things that we actually respond to are actually a little bit higher in the order of that. And then we start asking these questions. Why can't our cities be comfortable? Why can't they be convivial in the sense that they actually help bring us together? Why can't they be interesting? And maybe more appropriately, why can't they be fun? Where's the fun is a perfectly legitimate question to be asking in your next planning meeting. Seriously. Because it changes the dynamic. When we start asking that question, okay, we're going through all the traditional kind of stuff, I want somebody to raise their hand and say, this is good, but where's the fun? Because when we start thinking about that, we at least open the possibility of these other elements beyond functional and safe. Because let's face it, if it was just about paved roads, police, and fire service, there's nothing that keeps us in one place versus another. Yet we all recognize that clearly there is something beyond police, fire, and paved roads in our communities. And those things don't necessarily cost a whole lot of money. And in my book, I talk about this notion of a love note. These small things that have an outsized impact on the way we feel about our places. And I liken this to that handwritten note that goes with the gift. And gentlemen, at some point in our lives, men learn this lesson, that handwritten note is actually pretty darn important. You know, to our chagrin, we forget to give the note to our significant other, our mother, our girlfriend, something like that, and they look at the gift and think, oh, that's nice, you know, but where's the note? Now, we learn that lesson fairly quickly, that small gesture, because we take a moment, we connect emotionally, we think intimately, we're there, we're present. Small thing, outsized impact. Now, love notes, these small things that can have an outsized impact on people, on gifts, and certainly on cities. And I have a few examples of small things that have outsized impacts on places. How many folks have been back to New York City in the last couple of years and visited pedestrian-friendly Times Square? An amazing difference in perception and a relatively small thing in the grand scheme of New York. In the past, when you went to Times Square, the one thing you really wanted to do was stop and people watch, just to look around. It's like, wow, because it's sensory overload there. And you had this choice. You could take one step off the curb and you're going to get run over by a cab, or you could stand on the sidewalk and you're going to get run over by a New Yorker, right? Now, devil's choice. Now, what they did a couple years ago was they went in, they closed off one of the busiest intersections in one of the busiest cities in the world, and they made it pedestrian friendly. They brought in seating, they brought in Wi-Fi, and it's an amazing difference in the way we now experience Times Square, because you can actually look around. Fantastic, the one thing you always wanted to be able to do. And I was talking with the gentleman who runs the Times Square Business Alliance, and he told me something very interesting. He said in the last couple of years, a phenomenal thing has happened. Locals have started to come back to Times Square. Think about that. In the past, locals would not be caught dead, and John, you could probably verify this, John's from New York, that the locals would not be caught dead in Times Square because that's where all you tourists were, right? Now, because there's so much interesting stuff going on, it's comfortable, it's actually a place, it's like a giant third space, the locals have started to come back to Times Square. Interesting, because because again, we want to have that experience of being able to do the one thing that we love, which is people watch. And in the grand scheme of New York, again, small thing, huge outsized impact. While you're in New York, you better go check out Highline Park. For 30 years, this elevated railway, about a mile long in the lower part of Manhattan in the meatpacking district, they were trying to figure out what the heck to do with it. A lot of people said, tear this thing down, redevelop it. No, turn it back into trains, et cetera, et cetera. Well, along comes some citizen-led group, and they decide, well, let's make it into a park, a vertical park. It's like, wow, that's crazy. Well, a vertical park that snakes through these buildings, has this wonderful native grasses and small trees and things like that. And you wouldn't think that being 2 stories above the city would radically change the way you experience the city, but it does. It's fantastic up there. It has its own sort of ecosystem and environment. You feel like you're in another place. And this has had a huge impact on development in the lower part of Manhattan. Small thing, huge outsized impact. And a great lesson there, because all of us have that weird white elephant in our community, an old building, an old piece of infrastructure or something like that. You go, what the heck are we going to do with that? Yeah, great example of taking something and doing something wildly creative and different with that piece, with that white elephant. How many folks have been to Millennium Park in Chicago, right? Have you been to, this is called Cloud Gate, but locally it's known as the Bean because all good public art needs to have a nickname. If your public art does not get a nickname, I don't think it's actually hit the mark. It hasn't captured people's imaginations. Even if it's a derogatory nickname. We used to have the Exploding Chicken in Tampa. That's okay. At least people noticed. So Exploding Chicken. So got to give your art a nickname. But tell me when you went and saw Cloud Gate, you didn't do this. You went and found your reflection in the thing. You took your picture. You took your friend's picture. You took this picture of the skyline. You see kids rolling around underneath of it because it's like this giant funhouse mirror, and they're interacting with this piece of public art. And right next to it, you have these two towers that have these video screens on them, because these are actually video screens here. And the eyes open and it smiles at you. And then during the summer months, they have these water cannons that shoot water out onto the deck, and it's this sort of giant above-ground pool. And you will see hundreds of kids playing there on a typical summer day. And here's a great public policy planning axiom for you. When kids are happy, parents are happy. That's a pretty good public policy point. If you can figure out how to make the kids happy, you will definitely make the parents happy. And this is one of those small things in the grand scheme of Chicago that definitely works. And it illustrates a really important point. It illustrates the importance of fun and play. Think about play. Those moments of unstructured, unplanned play when we're just ourselves with our friends, our family, our significant others. Play is at the bedrock of those relationships. And we don't have enough opportunities to play with our city. And certainly public art is a great way to engage in that process. My partner Michelle and I were in Anchorage, Alaska in February this year. And it's still quite cold in February in Anchorage, surprising. But they do these ice sculptures every year around Christmas time. And they're these sort of interactive sculptures that kids are encouraged to sort of play on. So, okay, make the most of things. And when we were there, Michelle sort of walked up and sat down on this thing. And this little girl over here in the yellow, she walked up and says, "You're in my spot." Sorry. But these kids are engaging in this public art, and it's fun. And this is kind of an interesting thing. This little whirligig here that was made, sculpted out of ice, and fun little thing, small thing. Here's a secret, too. You want people to make that face in your city. When people make that face in your city, good things happen. Not only do they remember the park, they remember the city, they remember the experience, they're going to tell friends, they're going to spend money. Good things happen when people make that face in your city, and they make that face in your city when you surprise and delight them. They don't make that face when you fill some potholes for them. No one is playing in the potholes. And by the way, these things don't necessarily have to cost a whole lot of money. You know what this is over here? It's frozen water. It's frozen water and a little bit of creativity. It's the cheapest thing in the world. Small thing, outsized impact. Tampa Museum of Art. Folks know here, last couple years, the new Tampa Museum of Art opened there on the Hillsborough River. Fantastic new design, great collection, very cool piece of new infrastructure for Tampa Bay. But they also did two little things that I think are actually quite important. One is they put a dog park in the back right there on the Hillsborough River, and the other is the playground that's out in front of it. Now, as high-minded as we'd all like to think of ourselves, and oh, of course, I always go to the art museum, right? Think about it. How often do you actually go to the art museum and have that traditional museum experience where you pay your admission, you go through the galleries, you see the museum? Once, twice a year? Maybe when somebody's visiting from out of town or there's a really great new show that comes in? That's cool. But on a day-to-day basis, hundreds of people are interacting with that museum without ever actually going inside of it because they're availing themselves of that dog park and that playground. And I'm sure at some point somebody said, do we really need that dog park and that playground? Lawsuit waiting to happen. But no, they said these are important. They humanize and they anchor this museum and they make it more valuable, exponentially more valuable for these small things that build upon this thing. Of course, you have to have the museum, but these small things have an outsized impact on the overall quality of that experience. Oh, there we go. Farmers markets. How many of you have a farmers market in your city? Pretty much everybody, right? Every city in America seems to have a farmers market, and that's great. And people, when you're asked them, they go, oh yeah, that's nice, that's kind of cool. But if you actually start digging into that farmers market and talking to people, you'll find out that they really, really love those farmers markets. This is the farmers market in downtown St. Petersburg, the Saturday morning market. It's one of the largest in the southeast. On a typical Saturday, there'll be 10,000 people will come through there, 120 vendors, and it is where St. Petersburg goes to meet itself. I will go down there, I will always see people that I know, I will see interesting things, I will buy stuff, I'll see people with their kids, people with their dogs. I used to see former Mayor Rick Baker used to go down there and play his guitar, which I always thought was a pretty darn smart political move, right? To be able to see the mayor doing something cool outside, you know, no tie, hanging out playing the guitar. Pretty astute. And again, if you start asking your people, what do you really love about your place? At some point, they're going to get to that farmer's market and then start digging into that a little bit. You'll find out people are very attached to these kinds of things because it symbolizes all of the good stuff that people love about their places. And it's a small thing. And we just need to think about it a little bit more as a little bit more important in our grand scheme of things. Now, a few more things that make cities lovable. Folks in Orlando, any folks here from Orlando? Okay, a few. You know, this fountain in Lake Eola was dark for a couple of years. And then last year, Mayor Buddy Dyer made the commitment, no, we're going to relight the fountain, we're going to make it special again. And when they did, it was amazing. People loved it. The fountain was back to life. There was lights, there was color. And Lake Eola, that beautiful lake in downtown Orlando, became this sort of center for people to go back and say, that's the heart of our city, and look at that light. And people felt very good about it. And I'm sure some people were saying, you know, we could fill a lot of potholes for what it's going to cost to fix and, you know, maintain that fountain. But I guarantee you, again, no one is going to feel much better about their city because of the potholes, but they certainly feel better about it because of this little love note. Rituals and traditions. Families have rituals and traditions, businesses, and cities have rituals and traditions as well. Any folks here been to Providence, Rhode Island? A few? Okay. This is called water fire. Providence started this about 15 years ago with an artist by the name of Barnaby Evans. Barnaby was commissioned to do this project that takes advantage of the river that snakes through downtown Providence and enters into this round lake. And he took these braziers, he anchored them in the middle of the river, and they bring in cords of pine wood and they light them on fire. It's water and fire. It is the most basic thing in the world, except for maybe frozen water, and it is absolutely magical. Because when you go down there during a water fire event, you know, you smell that pine smoke, you hear the crackle of the wood, you see these dancing shadows because of all that moving light. Think about those times when we've actually just sat in front of a bonfire or a campfire and been absolutely mesmerized. There's something in our human nature that responds to this notion of fire, and we can just watch it forever. Well, imagine taking that notion and elevating it to a municipal level, and you have water fire. People there love it, locals love it, and if you're a tourist, you want to go when a water fire is happening. And a few years ago, I had the good fortune of participating in what they call a lighting ceremony. And like the villagers out of a Frankenstein movie, we carried these torches from City Hall down to the river. We put the torches into this urn, and from that urn, they light water fire. That will always inform the way I think and feel about Providence. Fantastic ritual and tradition. Western Massachusetts, there's a small town called Shelburne Falls. And 364 days out of the year, this iron bridge is what they call it. It has traffic. Trucks, cars go back and forth on it. But every year for the last dozen years or so, in August, they close down the bridge and they have dinner on it. How cool is that? Sort of taking a piece of public infrastructure and having dinner on it where 400 or so people, they bring in students to be the waiters and waitresses. They have local restaurants cater it, and it's actually a fundraiser for the Chamber of Commerce. And a great way to reimagine and re-see your city in a fantastic different light simply by being able to sit on the bridge that maybe you cross every day. And it makes you think and feel very different about that bridge and about your city just for that one little experience. I think that's a great ritual and tradition. What could you have dinner on in your city? Think about that. In Brattleboro, Vermont, rural community, they have a lot of cows, a lot of tractors, rural community. And so they decided they were going to play on that idea, you know, of the running of the bulls, you know, in Pamplona. Well, instead, they have the strolling of the heifers in Brattleboro. And so they said, okay, we're going to make a parade. We're going to have people bring their cows, and we'll sort of make it into a rural parade. And they do. They dress up their cows, sort of like parade floats. And if you don't have a cow, you know, you dress up your whatever you got. And while this is incredibly fun, there's actually some other stuff that's going on here. They're actually talking about the importance of the rural economy, the importance of their farmers, the idea of sustainability and sustainable farming at the same time. So it's all of this whole community thing wrapped up into this very charming ritual. Very cool. They do this every June. A bike-friendly city is a lovable city. Of course, you know, for the reasons that you would imagine. Well, if you're bike-friendly, it means we're better for the environment, we got healthier citizens, fewer cars, more fun. Because, you know, bike riding is fun. All true. But if you're a bike-friendly city, it says something. It says something very fundamental that people do pick up on. It says that it's not all about the car. Think about how many of our decisions seem to be in service to the car as opposed to people, right? Well, if we can say we're at least a bike-friendly city, we're at least acknowledging that, hey, we're thinking about you. You don't have to be on the top of Bicycling Magazine's most bike-friendly cities. In fact, most Florida cities don't do very well on those lists. That's okay. But I think if we can just become even a little bit more bike-friendly, people will pick up on that and will say, you know what, they're thinking about me. They're thinking about us. It's not just about the car. That's a pretty good message. A walkable city is a lovable city for similar reasons to being a bike-friendly city, but a walkable city allows for two important things. It allows for improvisation and discovery. Think about this. You're driving 45 miles an hour down the A1A. You see something new, a restaurant, store, something interesting. Do you stop? Probably not. You have to go back, make a U-turn, come all the way back around. We all know how hard that is in Florida. You make a mental note, say, hey, I'll check that out later. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But when you're walking, something new, hey, this is cool. I wonder what's in here. Or you go down the street or you go, hey, something smells good. And you're following your nose into something interesting. And you're discovering something. Maybe you're discovering something new about a city that you've lived in all your life. How wonderful is that? It's like discovering something new about your oldest friend. That's pretty darn cool. That does not happen at 45 miles an hour. That happens when we get out of our cars and we start interacting with our cities in a different way. Now, I'm not saying we have to become New York City. I don't think we can. I don't think that, we're not set up to be New York City. But again, if we can at least try to become a little bit more bike, a little bit more walking friendly, good things will happen because of that. A dog-friendly city is a lovable city. For those of you who own, cats and fish and ferrets and all that kind of stuff, with apologies, the reality is we don't walk our cats. We walk our dogs. And when we walk our dogs, interesting things happen. We're out there and we're interacting with our community, our neighborhoods, our sidewalks, and we're creating what developers and city officials like to call that sense of vitality on the street, right? Something's happening out there. That's good. People are using the sidewalks. And when they do, there's an interesting thing that seems to happen because, let's face it, two of us walking down the street, passing each other, no dog, just two people, on a typical day go, hey, okay, that's fine. But if there's a dog in the mix, not always, but oftentimes, there's a slightly different interaction, because the dog wags its tail at you. You look at the dog, oh, that's such a cute dog. What kind of dog is it? Oh, she's a puggle. Oh, I love puggles. Puggle and a beagle. Oh, that's very cute. And all of a sudden now, you're interacting with this person and this dog, and you're talking to this person just a little bit. I'm not saying you're going to become best friends with them, but it at least feels a little bit different. And there's a pretty good chance if you're in that neighborhood and that owner and that dog are in that neighborhood, you're going to see them again. And who knows what comes of that. And that, my friends, is social capital. A little bit of value in that relationship and that potential of a relationship. And a little side benefit here, in an era where we cannot afford more police and more surveillance equipment, that dog and that owner provide a sense of safety. And it's not because the puggle is an attack puggle. I have a little puggle. She's very timid. The fact is that I am out there walking the dog, and I am what Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist, called the eyes of strangers on a street. Think about it. We all walk down an empty street and we feel very exposed, right? But if there's somebody else out there, like a dog walker, it's like, hey, all good. And maybe what we could do is how do we encourage more dog ownership in maybe some of the marginal neighborhoods in our own community? Maybe it's as simple as putting in one of those posts, with the mitts and, stuff to pick up the poop and a place to throw the poop. Pretty simple. Or a dog park, things like that. A dog-friendly city is a lovable city. Interesting how dogs actually end up humanizing us in the city. A youth-friendly city is a lovable city. Certainly that means things beyond simply being family-friendly. Because everyone says we're a family-friendly city. Okay, that's cool. But these kids have this annoying habit of growing up and turning into surly teenagers. And we tend to not like them quite as much in that sort of phase and things like that. Because we don't understand their music and their hair and their dress and all that kind of stuff. But we have to start making allowances for that. Because we value them, we want them to stay. And part of that means accepting their culture. And this is, youth culture, is music and live music venues. And this is the one that always is problematic. It's skateboarding. Skateboarding. Here's the thing. When you think you're saying no skateboarding, and all of us have skateboarding ordinances in our cities, right? Can't skateboard here, can't skateboard there. You think you're saying no to an activity. What they're actually hearing is you're saying no to their culture. No to their culture. Because it's not just about the activity, because think about all the things that flows out of skateboarding. It's art, it's fashion, it's music. It is their sense of identity. And when you are negating their sense of identity, you are in a sense saying no to them. And come the time when they've got a college degree and they're a young professional with newly minted skills and you'd like them to say yes to your community, I think they're going to remember that you've been saying no to them for an awfully long time. So I think we need to find a balance between this. I get that you don't want them grinding on every flat surface in downtown. That's fine. But we better find a way to channel that energy into something else. Because again, we want them to say yes to us eventually. Ultimately, the things that are most lovable about cities are those very people who are in love with their places. And in my book, I call these folks co-creators because they are, in a sense, co-creating the city with you folks, the official city makers, as well as them, these sort of unofficial city makers, and this wonderful mix between the two. This is my friend Bob Devin Jones, and Bob is the creative director of a small black box theater in downtown St. Petersburg called the Studio at 620. Bob is a central node in what makes St. Petersburg a great place to live, work, and play, but he does not show up on any sort of city official org chart. He's, again, one of those sort of largely unheralded people that make St. Petersburg go. Now, if we were to lose Bob, we not only lose one creative director, but we lose all the stuff that he does, all the people he connects, all the projects that he shepherds, and all the things. Really, there's a pretty big gaping hole if Bob leaves. Now, he is an anchor persona. We're all very conscious of our anchor institutions and our anchor businesses, and we protect those. We need to start thinking about our anchor personas and figuring out how do we work with them? How do we protect them, keep them from losing interest and hope and steam in our communities? This is another co-creator. This is Candy Chang. She's from New Orleans, and she's an artist. And artists have this unique way of looking at cities that I think is a wonderful lens for all of us to consider. One of her early projects was this little thing, a stencil here. It says, "It's good to be here." And she uses spray chalk, not spray paint, spray chalk. It washes off as soon as it rains. Spray chalk, and she started putting this message, "It's good to be here," all over. Now think about that message in the context of New Orleans. It's good to be here. A city that most people thought they had lost at one particular point go, yeah, it is good to be here. And you start seeing that over and over and over again, reinforcing a simple, elegant message, creatively and wonderfully delivered, that is probably as powerful as any branding campaign that you guys are going to put together, done by an artist for almost nothing. It's good to be here. One of her other projects I thought was just wildly fun. You know, we all have name tags and things like that, okay. Well, there's still a ton of empty buildings and abandoned storefronts in New Orleans, and they sort of sit empty and people wait and see what's going to happen. Well, she decided to come up with these little name tags, this polyurethane stuff, so it comes on, comes off pretty easily, and says, "I wish this was." And she sort of challenged people to sort of write in what they think it should be. I wish this was a home owned by someone who cared, a community garden, not so scary looking, yeah. Brad Pitt's house, okay. Full of nymphomaniacs with PhDs. Wishful thinking. A grocery. So she puts these stickers out, all throughout the community and invites people, free stickers, take them, put them up on the stuff that you see around. And people did. You start seeing these things all around, and it's like people are voting. We all do charrettes and focus groups on the abandoned building or that empty storefront. What should we do with this? Okay, we can do it that way. Or we can maybe go directly to the people and say, hey, what do you think about all this stuff? And that's kind of cool. And when you start seeing this stuff over and over and over again, that's really kind of important. Because think about it. When we walk past an empty storefront, we go, man, somebody should do something about this. Doesn't anybody care? I see this. I see people voting. I see hundreds of people saying they want to see something here. It says somebody else gives a damn. It says somebody else cares about this beyond just me. And again, an artist did this. Not your PR, not your Chamber of Commerce, not the economic development folks, not the downtown folks. An artist can hold up a lens to a community in a wonderful way. But we can tap into this idea and this kind of thinking. Good stuff. This is Mitch Willis. He is an artist from Wichita, Kansas. And he lives on an area called Commerce Street, which is this sort of industrial area where lots of artists are now flocking in Wichita. And like a lot of areas, he goes, we're having all kinds of trouble with graffiti. So I'd talk to the city would come in, they'd clean up the graffiti, but of course that's just an open invitation for the taggers and the graffiti artists to come back. He says, okay, so what are we gonna do? So Mitch decided he's gonna take it in his own hands, and he said, I went out and I bought this old school bus. He said he paid $1,200 for it. And he had them move an old boxcar into the back of his, right behind his building, because this is railroad lines right back there. And he rolled that in, and he put a sign on them It says, do not paint over any piece unless your piece is much better. If you do, go over a piece completely over it. Show respect and be thoughtful with art. If you need anything, ring cowbell on the back door. And at the bottom it says here, this boxcar is provided by the Go Away Garage and the Willis family for competent writers and artists to utilize. In exchange, we ask that you do not paint or vandalize any buildings or property in the neighborhood. Thank you. He created graffiti flypaper, and it worked. All of a sudden, he said, graffiti in the neighborhood went down by like 95% because these kids now had an outlet for where to put their stuff. And actually, the bus and the train became sort of the gallery. If you're an artist, you want people to see your work, right? Well, if I want people to see my work, I better put it on Mitch's bus. Pretty darn cool. Again, an artist, somebody who loves their community and wanted to step up and do something above and beyond ordinary levels of citizenship. This is city repair in Portland. Most communities have that issue. It's like you hear people asking for traffic calming in your cities all the time, right? Well, most of the time they don't go out and actually put in their own speed bumps, and these guys didn't either. But what they did was really quite interesting. So they get together in these neighborhoods and they paint the intersections. And an interesting thing happens when they paint these intersections. The cars slow down. Because think about it, you're driving down this road here, it's like, what's that yellow, orange, green thing up there? It's like, hopefully your first notion is not to speed up, but hey, wait, I better slow down. And people do. And because they've slowed down a little bit, making this a little bit more bike-friendly, a little bit more pedestrian-friendly, the people feel like they have a little bit more ownership of this neighborhood and this community. So kids now play outside a little bit more, and the people are now using these corners as more of community space. Power of a coat of paint. This was Mary Durham in May of last year. Excuse me, March of last year. There was a wedding in Durham, North Carolina. 1,600 brides and grooms, but they weren't marrying each other. They were marrying the city of Durham. In what they described as the largest civic union in history, these 1,600 people got up in front of their friends and neighbors, and they pledged their oath of love and fealty to the city of Durham. And the oath included the things like a promise to keep the streets clean and safe, to vote responsibly, to protect the environment, support local arts and culture. Pretty darn cool. And it was sort of a reflection of people recognizing that they're actually in a relationship with their place. And the legend has it that this was started by a woman who was so in love with the city of Durham, somebody said, well, if you love it so much, why don't you marry it? And she goes, good idea. I'm going to do it. Now, again, wasn't done by the chamber, wasn't done by the city, but done by citizens who wanted to go above and beyond and do something kind of fun and pretty cool. Swings Tampa Bay. This is my friends Ruben and Hunter. They're based in St. Petersburg. Ruben's the airborne one here. Early 20s, a couple of designers from downtown St. Petersburg at USF St. Pete. About a year and a half ago, they started this project where they go out at night and they would hang swings from trees, buildings, and infrastructure. They don't get permission. They just sort of, all of a sudden now you come in and there's this painted swing hanging from this tree downtown. It's like, what the heck is that? And I asked them, so why a swing? And they said, well, a swing is a spontaneous community building exercise. Because think about it, you're walking down the street, you're there with your girlfriend, your significant other, your kids more likely. You see your kids all of a sudden run to the swing, and all of a sudden now you're pushing them on the swing, and you're having that moment. Remember, surprise and delight? It's like, oh, surprise and delight. Little things happen. And this was kind of cool. Remember, when people make that face, good things happen in your city, right? And especially when that happens in kind of unusual places, like the overpass over 275. Admittedly, they said this one did not last very long. The city did come in and they pulled it down. But what's interesting is, Mayor Foster and his team and council have have met with these guys. They said, you know what? Publicly, they say, look, we got to take the swings now. We can't have them out there. But privately, they've told them, look, we love what you're doing. Keep it up. We like the energy. We like the enthusiasm. So they recognized that they didn't want to squelch the enthusiasm of these young men who have this passion for doing something interesting for their community. Interesting detente there. Instead of standing on officialdom and maybe throwing these guys in jail or charging them or something, says, wait, we don't want to squelch this enthusiasm. This is my friend Andrew Anderson. He's from a little town in Iowa. His name called Muscatine, which is on the Mississippi River there. And rural town, he said, most people here are hardworking, Midwestern, agrarian, rural, economy. He says, but we don't think of ourselves as being very creative. He goes, I wanted to change people's notion of what they think about their city. He says, so I got together with my friend, and we started looking through sort of local legends. We found this thing about this river monster, like their version of Loch Ness. He said, so they got together some materials, and last year they created the Muscatine River Monster. It's made out of that material, like in front of auto dealerships. It kind of moves with the wind and whatnot. And they put it in the upper floors of this old hotel that had been turned into condos. They worked with the developer around that. And people said, wow, that's really cool. That's fun. They kind of meant it as sort of a one-off. It's like, oh, make people smile, surprise and delight them. But people really respond. They said, hey, we like the monster. Could we get the monster in our building? And they said, sure, why not? So now the monster's definitely made the rounds. Other storefronts, local community college dorms, the public library, and last year's 4th of July parade. Now, what's interesting about this is, of course, you know, it's fun and very cool, but look at all these people looking at this river monster, you know, in the community, saying, hey, wait, that's us. Someone from here did that. Maybe we're not as rural and hardworking and all this other stuff that we think we are. Maybe we're this too. Because again, this creative person held up a mirror to the community and said, you are creative, you can do this. And I think that's incredibly powerful. I think that's incredibly important work as well. People who are in love with their cities. Here's an interesting one. Many of you probably have heard of the Grand Rapids Lip Dub. In sort of city-making circles, this was a major thing that happened last year. But for a few of you who don't know, it all begins last year in January when Newsweek magazine declared Grand Rapids, Michigan, a dying city, one of America's 10 most dying cities. And this was based upon population loss between 2000 and 2010. Now, if somebody says something really negative about your city, what do? Well, typically you think, well, we need a new ad campaign, we need a PR blitz and things like that. But you know, money being pretty tight these days, probably don't necessarily have that kind of money just lying around the way we used to. So there's like, are we gonna live with this moniker? What are we gonna do? In walks this 22-year-old kid named Rob Bliss. He's the guy here in the green t-shirt. And Rob comes in and says, I have an idea. We're gonna do a lip dub. A lip what? A lip dub, L-I-P-D-U-B. He says, for those of you who don't know, a lip dub is a video shot as one continuous shot of us, you know, lip syncing to like a popular song. We could put on a song here, play it over through the sound system, and everybody starts, you know, lip syncing. Here we go, boom, lip dub. Boring, but a lip dub nonetheless. They said, no, we're gonna make the world's largest lip dub. We're gonna get everybody we can involved. We'll shoot it downtown, it'll be epic. We'll use YouTube, we'll use Facebook, we'll put it out there, it'll go viral, social media, all that kind of stuff. Now, can you imagine how that kind of went over in council the first time that was suggested? You want to do a lip what using you-who, social media viral? How old are you, son, and what's up with the hair, right? Because Rob does not look like your traditional city solutions provider. He doesn't have a suit. He doesn't have, you know, a stack of reports of saying, here's what we've done before with these predictable outcomes, and here, if you do this, you're going to get this, right? The safe stuff that we all sort of fall back on like that. He goes, no, I've got this weird idea. Other people have done sort of lip dub stuff. It's kind of cool. You can take a look at that, but why not? Let's take a risk. And maybe because, you know, they had no choice, or maybe because there was a little bit of vision in there, the city said, look, we don't have any money, but we can help connect you, we can validate this, we'll provide police and fire service to help cordon off downtown. And they did. And they went and they raised some private money, about $40,000, and last May they shot the Grand Rapids lip dub. Now, the actual video is about 9.5 minutes long. I'm not going to show you the entire video, but I am going to show you a little bit because it's really quite amazing, and I do encourage you, if you've not seen the whole thing online, check it out. But here's a little bit of the Grand Rapids lip dub. If our sound guy could actually turn up the sound on that. Well, it's Bye Bye Miss American Pop. Yeah, I am not a singer. Played in bands, never gave me a microphone because I cannot sing. Can we please? We tested this earlier. Anybody know the words? Everyone knows the words. That's why they chose the song. They said, Bye Bye Miss American Pie. It's because it's about life, it's about death, and renewal. And what they did is...
The halftime air was sweet perfume while the sergeants played a marching tune. The flames climbed
downtown. It takes place over a mile-long course. 5,000 people are involved. And it's actually quite an amazing logistical feat. They did 5 takes. This is the 5th and final take. Can you imagine being the one guy who misses his cue and go, oh shoot, sorry about that, man. Experience Grand Rapids. How many of you have seen that video before? Okay, not as many as I would have thought. Okay, that's good. That video has been viewed over 5 million times on YouTube. It got picked up by national and international media. Rob was interviewed on Good Morning America, and Grand Rapids got tens of millions of dollars of positive brand exposure because they were willing to listen to a 22-year-old kid with a weird, untested, wacky idea, and they're willing to take a risk. Interesting. Now, what's the lesson there? Well, it's not to go out and do another lip dub, because it's been done. It's been done really, really well. But in the spirit of that lip dub, what could we do? And the next time someone comes to you in council or in front of the city to do something different, that maybe it sounds a little weird, maybe they're not as polished, maybe they have just the kernel of a good idea, maybe we're going to give them a second look. Because how much would it have sucked if Grand Rapids had said no to Rob? And he said, you know what, maybe the heck, I'm going to get out of the city. They don't appreciate me. And think about all that they would have missed by not taking advantage of that talent that is there in the community. By the way, it's interesting to note that Rob did not start out doing the Grand Rapids lip dub as his first sort of foray into all of this. His earliest projects with the city, he organized pillow fights in the park. Pillow fights. Now, for those of you who are looking at that Swings Tampa Bay thinking, yeah, that's cute, but is that kind of serious? I would put swings and that pillow fights in the park sort of in that same continuum. Yeah, that's nice. But pillow fights in the park led to Rob doing this giant water slide in downtown, which led him to doing the art prize contest, where they threw 100,000 paper airplanes off the top of the highest building in downtown Grand Rapids, which sets him up perfectly to do the Grand Rapids lip dub on this sort of epic scale. By the way, remember I said don't do another lip dub? Well, that's holds true for all of you, except if you're Rob Bliss, because right now they are in the process of doing a statewide lip dub. They're going to all these different cities. I don't know the exact details, but they've started to put the word out, and they're starting to make appearances in different cities. So they're going to do a state Michigan-wide lip dub around something. So look for that sometime in the not-too-distant future. It should be epic. Now, the folks like Rob Bliss, like Bob Devin Jones, those folks, those co-creators that I was talking about, they're like the most powerful of spices. You don't need a whole lot of them, but you certainly need some of them in your community. And the reason I know you don't need a lot of them is because Wikipedia tells me so. And not for the reasons that you would think. Folks here all know Wikipedia, right? Folks, everybody here knows or uses Wikipedia, right? Any folks here made a Wikipedia entry? A few? More than 5 Wikipedia entries. 1. There you go. That's what's called participation inequality. All of us use the resource, right? But a very few numbers of us actually contribute something back to it. Now, all that content that's on Wikipedia, and we're talking about tens of millions of man-hours, was donated, was volunteer time. And it was done by a very small percentage of the total users. In fact, studies show less than 1% of the users of Wikipedia have ever made an entry or given something back to Wikipedia. Participation inequality. I believe physical communities follow a similar pattern, in the sense that a very small number of us are actually making the cities go with the content, all the things that we sort of generate. And I would include, obviously, you guys as the official city makers, but it's also this cadre of unofficial city makers, and how we engage them, I think, is going to be the difference in making great and lovable cities. Because they're a resource, and they're waiting to be tapped, but we have to be conscious of them first. And I did some math here. And I was going to actually include Hollywood, but thanks to AT&T, the internet was down last night, and I couldn't get on to find out what the population of Hollywood was in time. So thank you, AT&T. But I had some backup stuff here. Tampa and St. Petersburg. I'm from Tampa Bay, but let's take St. Petersburg where I'm from. 248,000 people, which means that there's about 2,400 people that are making that city go, official and unofficial folks. Well, what if we were to add just 10% to that number? 10% more co-creators to the mix. 248 more Bob Devin Joneses. People are going to go out and start things, businesses, organizations, movements, making cool stuff happen. How would that impact our communities? Exponentially. Exponentially increase the quality of life because of all of the stuff that we're doing. Think about that in your own city. Do the math in your head. What's the population of my city? It's like this. And you mean if I added 30 more people, if you're a town of 30,000, if I added 30 more of these folks, we could do some amazing things? Absolutely, you could do some amazing things. And here's the secret. Most of those folks are not living in Charlotte and Atlanta and Chicago. They don't have to be recruited to come here. Most of those folks that you need are already in your community. They just don't know quite how to get in the game. They don't think they have the right degree, they don't think they have the right resources, and they don't think they have permission to get in and help you guys make change happen, to do something above and beyond ordinary levels of citizenship for their cities. We need to change that. We need to encourage these people. And I'd love to talk with you about how you might do that, because I've seen some amazing examples of cities that have embraced this idea, and how it manifests is really quite remarkable, because it's a different way of thinking about this stuff. And these small things really do matter. Because think about this. There's a pretty big gap between the city that we desire and the city that we can afford these days. The question becomes, what are we going to do? You know, are we going to sit on our hands and wait for the coffers to get full again? Because if that's the case, we're going to probably be waiting a while. Or are we going to figure out how to do something different? Are we going to figure out who's going to step into the breach and into that gap and do something above and beyond for their city? And I submit to you, it's going to be those people who are emotionally engaged, who are in love with their places. Because when you love something, you do go above and beyond. You forgive its shortcomings, and you fight for it. You fight for it. We need more people who are willing to step up and fight for their cities and do something extraordinary for them. That, to me, is the challenge in these days. When we don't have the resources to do things, how do we get more people connected and caring and giving a damn about their place? Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I wish you guys all the best. We're going to be signing some books. I'd love to talk with you about how we might do this and answer any of your questions. Thank you.